population ecology. Population ecology is, we're going to go from an ecology, we're going to go from like real small issues of ecology, starting with individuals and a population. So like us, we're a population of Homo sapiens. We live in the same place at the same time. We can potentially interbreed. And then we'll get to bigger issues in ecology as we go along. So let's define ecology. Ecology is the relationships, the interactions between living and non-living things. So that's kind of nice and easy. In general, ecology, we're talking about the big stuff. Oh, right, you're in the beginning of your book now. I know you thought you finished the book last week, but you didn't. So when we're talking about living things, anything living from microscopic organisms all the way up to large trees, large animals, fungus, everything in between, something microscopic and singular celled to multicellular. Anything non-living, we're talking about rock, soil, air, water. So when we're looking at ecology, we're looking at the relationships between things that are all around us. Everything is included in ecology. Let's go back to biology. What does biology mean? Remember that B-I-O word should give you a clue. So give these a little read over. Does B-I-O refer to the earth? What study is that? Geology, right? A study of animals. Who knows what that one is? Where might you go to see animals, a place? Yeah, good. The zoo, right? The zoology is the study of animals. The study of natural processes, that's kind of included in ecology. Study of non-living things, and then the study of living things. So if you remember terms that we talked about in regard to this term living, if we were talking about something non-living, it would be A. What does the term living refer to? Yeah, bio. A, biotic, and then this would be biotic. So this is the study of biology. Ecosystem ecology. We'll get into the bigger picture of ecosystems later. We're going to talk about smaller stuff today. But regardless, when we're talking about ecosystem ecology, we're talking about again, there's A, biotic, the non-living, A for non, bio for living. So as I mentioned before, everything socks, rocks, soil, I guess socks would be non-living, unless they have weird stuff in them. Socks, rocks, water, atmosphere. Oh, thank you. I feel like.
I'm so happy that you're good. Congrats. Let's hope you're better.
Thank you. No, it's okay. That's very sweet.
I didn't smell them. I don't know if it was just me.
They smell great. Thank you. And then remember that the living things are the BIO, the biotic. There's that BIO for living, non-A living biotic. So when we're talking ecology, we're talking about the relationship between all of those things together. All right, so let's just talk about some importance of ecology. You probably hear about the importance of ecology all the time. I was just listening. I don't know if any of you listen to Science Friday. It's a podcast. It's really, I encourage you, if you're interested in just like science and podcasts. This one's nice. It gives you little like 15, 20-minute chunks of information about different things that are currently happening in the world. And a recent one was, what do we do about plastics? How do we deal with them? And that's a big ecology issue because the way we live our lives, we want to live our lives very conveniently, just pick up, grab and go. Plastic initially is very cheap to manufacture, but the effects of plastic on our health, the environment's health, the health of other organisms is very costly. So the money, the profit goes to the manufacturers of the plastic, and then the cost goes to you, it goes to other organisms, it goes to the government who's got to clean up plastic messes, it goes to medicine. So the costs, they are inferred into other places. The other thing that was really interesting, another podcast was talking about how plastics, now they're finding them in places like your coronary arteries of your heart, and that those plastics are fused with the plaques that cause people to have heart attacks. So we're getting down to plastics in every minutia of our beings. Plastics are found in the placenta. So they are going directly from mother to fetus. And these things we have seen, and there's a lot of studies looking at the correlations between plastics and many different diseases, which those diseases then are being initiated in the womb that early now, because they are everywhere. California had tried to pass a law to have filters in washing machines to filter out microplastics before the water that's used in your washing machine goes back to cycle through our systems. And our politicians vetoed it. So there's lots going on in terms of plastics just in general. So those are some of the ideas about ecosystems and ecology. The other thing that we're really going to focus on through this unit is this idea of limited resources, that when you have something in small amounts and organisms and the abiotic factors are all wanting that thing and fighting for it, it causes issues within an ecosystem, within populations, within communities. So we will look at this very closely today and tomorrow as well. The last thing I want to mention is this recycling. We're going to look at recycling a little tiny bit in terms of what we might think of initially as humans, the recycled plastics or what we put in the recycle bin. But really what we're going to focus on in this unit is the recycling of nutrients. And one of the most fascinating things that I think about for this unit is that carbon dioxide and oxygen, the recycling of those two things, like the oxygen that you breathe in that comes from plants and you breathe out carbon dioxide, those oxygens and carbon dioxides are constantly being cycled through the autotrophs of our ecosystem and the heterotrophs. You may have some of that carbon dioxide that you produce in your body may be billions of years old. Imagine that some of these atoms are so old that they could have been in the atmosphere before life and prebiotic evolution. They could have been in dinosaurs. So big focus, again, will be recycling of nutrients in our ecosystems. So today we're going to focus on population ecology. And remember, population biology ecology. When we're talking about a population, we are a population. We live in the same place at the same time. We're the same species, and we can potentially interbreed. I'll remind you a lot of these things that I know we covered early in the semester. We're going to take a look at how do populations grow, what regulates population growth, how are populations distributed, and then we're going to talk about the human population, because one of the things about humans, because of factors in the advancements of technology through our own human evolution, we have defied a lot of the kind of general laws of ecosystem ecology or just nature in general, that we can fight things like diseases. If we run out of space, we can build up. If we can manufacture things to make our lives convenient, all things that natural populations can't do. And so that gives us a little bit, or maybe a lot, of an advantage. But again, we'll talk a little bit too about how maybe those advantages have turned into not such great things in the long run. All right, so back to the basics. Population. A population are organisms that are the same species. They live in the same place at the same time. And then here's that breeding thing that we talked a lot about in evolution, is that a really important factor in a population is to be able to keep going. They have to be able to make a next generation and a next generation. They have to be able to evolve. Do they have an adaptation to the current environment to survive? What we mean by potentially interbreed, interbreeding is not just about having sex and having offspring, but that the offspring can also have offspring. And again, a population is one that can keep itself going. Population ecology, we're going to look at some of the things of the how and why that population might change over time. So think a little bit about the hows and whys too. Remember back to the beginning of the semester when we talked about evolution and advantageous traits, and we're going to kind of reflect a little bit about that advantages or those advantages in the context of what are the things around us that we're advantageous over or not advantageous over. All right, so a little bit about population growth. We're going to take a look at some simple math. 3 factors are the focus of the growth of a population. The 2 biggest are how many people are born, how many people die, and then with populations, migration is minimal. With humans, we know because we have airplanes and boats and cars that we can do migration in and out so much more efficiently and easily or easier than other populations, right? So if you're a wolf out here on the prairie, not a wolf, coyote out here on the prairie, that you can't just hop on a plane and go visit your relatives who live in Colorado. You can't do that. You'd have to walk there. So for natural populations, migration is very minimal. The biggest impacts in population size are births and deaths. So we're going to factor migration in a little bit. All right, so migration, you have immigration. Immigration means that individuals are joining a population. That means that they live somewhere else, and then they come over to this other group that is the same species. Remember that they can potentially interbreed with them. An interesting thing about migration is that if they live somewhere else, they could bring new genes into the population. If you have individuals leaving a population, we call that emigration. So those are the 2 sides, right? Immigration joining, emigration leaving. The 2 parts of migration. Populations are stable, meaning that the numbers don't really change of the population when you have an equal amount of births and deaths and an equal amounts of immigration and emigration. So let's take a look at calculating this. If you have more births and immigrants, those that are joining the population, your population size will get larger. And your population will get smaller if you have more deaths and more immigrants than you have births and immigrants. So those should be kind of easy to wrap your brain around. We will calculate annual growth rates. So we're going to categorize our births and deaths into one simple equation, births minus deaths. And then we're going to take our migration, our immigrants, and subtract our immigrants. Each of these 2 individual calculations. So first we'll calculate births minus deaths, and we'll get a number. And then we'll get a number based on immigrants minus emigrants. And then we'll take this number plus this number, and that will tell us, depending on the time period that you're studying, if we're studying humans, we might go year to year. If we're studying bacteria, it could be every hour. So depending on the population generation time, we will look at different timetables. So again, birth and death are the most significant impacts to the size of a population. In natural populations, migration is usually not that significant. Very different from the human population. All right, let's talk about things that influence this big calculation of births minus deaths. Look at, there's that BIO again. So you may have been thinking like, why did she go back to what is biology? Because we're going to use that term BIO a lot in this unit. Biotic potential. Just think about those two words. If you can understand from looking at them, what does biotic mean and what does potential mean? Biotic, it's something to do with living things, right? And it means, potential means the advantage, the ability. So what's the ability of the living things in an ecosystem is biotic potential. And when we're talking about the advantage or the ability, we're looking at the ability to have more births and less deaths. When things are really, really good in a population within their ecosystem, it means that they will have little crowding, they will have lots of natural resources, they will have very little diseases, very little death. So all of those things, everything is flourishing. Everybody's comfortable. Everybody has advantageous traits. They are surviving easily in the population. Well, maybe not everyone has advantageous traits, but majority of them do. So things are really, really good. Limited resources are not an issue. We have unlimited resources. Everybody has access and easy survival. Predators, you don't have a lot of other organisms coming to eat you. You have the maximum amount of births and a minimum amount of deaths. So biotic potential, or just remember again, what do those two words mean? And that'll give you the idea of what's going on here. But then the environment and other things kick in, and then we have the opposition of biotic potential, which is environmental resistance. Resistance, if we just think about that in terms of like physics terms, it means friction. Is friction, if you think about the word friction, is that good? If you have friction with another person, does that imply a good relationship? Okay, so resistance, meaning that something in the environment is resisting or has friction with the biotic potential. There can be a lot of things. So as time goes on with the population, can you have a maximum amount of births forever? No, you're going to start to have now limited resources eventually. So space is going to run low if you just keep birthing and birthing and birthing. Food, water, access to everything that has been unlimited starts to become more limited over time. So as this increases, this increases. As this is limited, this is better. So they're kind of like biotic potential and environmental resistance are opposing factors. That environmental resistance, like I said, it could be space. You run out of space. You start to run out of food. You start to have to compete for resources. If you remember in evolution, evolution does not favor organisms who have a lot of competition. Less competition, the better your evolution, better your survival. Predators, when you start to become bigger in a population, if you remember back to evolution, that when we looked at predator preys, that the prey would go up, the food would go up, then the predators got to eat a lot, and then when the prey started to die off because they were getting eaten, the predators start to go down. And so we have this relationship with predation and the amount of prey or organisms. Parasites can become more in the population. And then just things like natural events can happen, hurricanes, floods, that will affect a large population. And then natural selection. As you get to be a bigger population, do you start to get variants where you have more advantageous traits? Okay, so the first half of lecture, we're going to focus on biotic potential. We're just going to see like when things are so good, what happens in a population. And then we'll start to talk about, well, things can only be so good for a while, and then environmental resistance is going to come in. So let's focus on biotic potential. Typically, we're looking at changes in individuals per time. We add up those individuals, and then that gives us a little view into what is the population doing in terms of size. We look at these changes per unit time, depending on the organism. We're typically looking at, for something smaller with short generation time, we may be looking at minutes to hours. And if we're looking at us or other large, long-lived organisms, we're looking at probably months or even years. Okay, biotic potential, we often call it growth rate. It gets a lowercase r. It is italics. Many of you will go on to take ecology evolution or an ecology class, and you'll get into a lot more calculations of this. So I'm just giving you the basis of growth rate. To calculate growth rate, we go back to our original equation of talking about things like birth and death. We're going to, for growth rate, we're going to ignore migration in natural populations. We're going to focus on the benefits of the births. Birth rate is a lowercase italics b. Death rate, lowercase italics d. And that's it. That's how we calculate growth rate. We're going to calculate it probably from, like, if we're talking about trees, for example, year to year. All right, so let's take a look. Let's say we're talking about a population of mice. And we start out with a population of 10,000 individuals. In our first year, we have 500 deaths, but we have 1,500 births. So we can see more births than deaths gives us some good biotic potential in this population. So let's calculate our growth rate for this population. Our birth rate, to get the rate, when we're talking about a rate, we're talking about a percentage. So to get the percentage of individuals that were born in our first year, we have to take the number of births, divide that by the number of individuals in our population. So 1,500 divided by 10,000 gives us 0.15 births for the population for that year. We can also kind of put it onto like individuals and say it's the 0.15 births per individual. What that means, right? Can you have a 15% child? Can you have, no, right? So it's implying to us not everybody, and putting it in this context, it means not everybody is having offspring that year. But if we divide up all the offspring, the 1,500 over 10,000 individuals, it gives us the idea that there's 0.15 births per everybody in that population. I know, a little weird context of that. The death rate we said was 500 out of 10,000 individuals will give us the death rate, 0.05 deaths per mouse per year. We're not done yet though. Now that we've figured out birth rate and death rate, remember that growth rate is B, birth rate, minus D, death rate. Simple calculation. How do you get the growth rate this year? Remember, you're taking B minus D. So which one of these is it? Okay, good. So B, we're going to take 15%, 0.15, 15%, 0.05, 5%. No. Yeah, 5%. Sorry. And then we get 10%, 0.10, or 10% growth. That's a pretty significant growth in that population. That means biotic potential, that's good right now. One of the things when we're looking at our calculations here, that 10,000 individuals, we call that our original population size, and that is an italicized capital N. That's what we start with in our population. We're going to use this original population size to calculate year to year how much our population is growing or receding. So now, when we talk about population growth, we take our growth rate, R, times our population size, our original population size, N. So for the first year, when you take R, what you just got, times N, our population size, what do you get? What is Rn for the first year? So again, take the R that you just calculated out times 10,000 individuals that we started with. Okay. So we take our Rn, we get 1,000, 10% times 10,000 individuals. That gave us in the first year 1,000 new individuals. And then we could continue on. We could say now, so when we're taking a look at our Rn for the second year, our N has changed, right? So now, considering that you've added 1,000 to the original 10,000 individuals, you're going to use a different N. Okay, so use your new N times our 10% growth rate. And tell me in the second year, how many individuals do we potentially add? Which one of these? We know it's not going to be this, right? Because that was the last answer. So which one? Yeah, good. So C, and we got that calculation by adding our 1,000 individuals to our original 10,000. That's why I have 11,000 here. We took N plus our first year's Rn, 10,000 plus 1,000 gives us 11,000. And then when we calculate our Rn for the second year, we take our 10% growth rate times our now new N in the second year, 11,000, and we get 1,100 new individuals in that population. If every year they're adding 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,450, are we going to see significant changes to our population number early on in this population? We're going to see it start going, yeah, it's going to start really going up. So in these kind of ideal situations, you can see exponential growth happening, a lot of growth really, really quickly. We call this rapid exponential growth. Now, what this might indicate is that our population will accelerate forever and ever. If you just had enough resources and lack of competition and lack of predators and lack of diseases, you can imagine a population would just keep going forever. And we're going to just think about that for a while. And then once we start going up, we're going to know that environmental resistance is going to come and it's going to start squashing that acceleration, that exponential growth. But if we're just thinking about ideal situations, we're going to start out low and then it's going to really quickly start to shoot up. And so when we graph that, it makes a J. We call that a J-shaped curve. Exponential growth is a J-shaped curve. So here, if we're talking about different kinds of bacteria, if we're talking about one kind of bacteria in different situations, that here you can see that the exponential growth will happen at different hours depending on the conditions that each population is going to experience. So in this green population, it says it takes about 3.5 hours to produce 1,500 bacteria. So that's what we're going to look at. How many hours does it take each of these populations, depending on the situation that they're in? Maybe this one, it's in an environment that's more wet, that can allow them to have less individuals dry out, or maybe there's less predators or more space. The different situations, what we're looking at is their ability to get to 1,500 is where you really start to see at 1,500, you see that exponential growth shooting up. So if it takes about 3.5 hours for them to produce 1,500 bacteria, we've got a really good situation. They can really start to accelerate quickly. That somewhere around 3.5 hours, you really see that exponential growth. If it takes 4 hours, you'll see it at about 4 hours. And then if it takes about 5.5 hours, you can see what happens, that it takes a little more time. If we take a look at a bigger population, we might look at this in regard to years rather than hours. And here, let's say that we're looking at how long does it take this population to get to that 24-year point. If they start to shoot up about 24 years, you can see that this is going to happen at about maybe like the year, maybe 23. And then if it takes them a while more, you can see that it's about 30 years. Okay, again, let's think back. What was R again? If you need to look back, go ahead. All right, I hear some people saying growth rate. Remember that R is growth rate. Growth rate is V minus D. Growth rate again. You're going to take the rate of the births. You're going to get a birth percentage based on the number of individuals born divided by the number of individuals you started with. And the death rate, the number that die in the population in that given time, divided by the initial population size. We're taking B divided by N and D divided by N. All right, so exponential growth, the biggest thing here is the births are going to way exceed our deaths. More births, less deaths, good situation. All right, let's talk about the factors that can allow a population to just go crazy quickly. So what affects? Oh, why is that one first? Okay, so let's talk about this word fecundity. Fecundity means we're talking about that evolutionarily inherent thing. Your genes, your traits, you have a lot of individuals in the population who easily survive based on their genetics, their traits, given the circumstances they're in. That's fecundity. Advantageous genes is fecundity. Remember, when we're talking about advantageous genes, that goes back to evolution. A big part of evolution is that not only do you have advantageous genes that allows you to survive easily, if you survive easily, our third thing that usually happens is that you can have time to reproduce. Often your offspring, if you have advantageous genes given that time, will also have advantageous genes, which means that in fecundity, in the scope of ecology, is that if you have advantageous genes, you reproduce, your offspring also have those advantageous genes, your population can go up. So remember again, this is really related to genetics, advantageous genes, and evolution. When do you first reproduce? We saw that kind of like that crux in those graphs that we just looked at. When does it really go from kind of low to shooting up? Age of first reproduction. When can you get the individuals in your population adding? Depends on your age of first reproduction. How often can you reproduce? Can you do it every year? Is it 2 years, 5 years? Is it 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes? When can you reproduce? How often can you do it? What's your reproductive lifespan? Do you have a year to pop out as many offspring as possible, or do you have 80 years? There's a big difference in how many you can add. And how many can you have at one time? 1, 2, 1,000? So all of these will alter your biotic potential. When all of these are very positive, your J-shaped curve is a very skinny J. If you have some that are maybe not as good as others, your J may be a little wider. Oh, sorry, one more. The death rate of the offspring. Do your offspring have the ability to survive? All of these will also depend on environmental resistance. Is it the beginning of your population in a new area where you have all of the resources, space, lack of predators, lack of disease, or are these all facing a time when it's really crowded and disease starts ticking up and you start to get a lot of predators and competition? So these can vary depending on your environmental resistance factors. All right, so let's take a look at just kind of a typical seasonal area population. So when we're talking about organisms that live in our area of the world, because of seasons, we see annual or yearly growth and crash cycles. So right now, we're right about here. Well, actually, right here. Okay, so things are starting to get better. There's more sunlight. The Earth is tilting toward the sun. Because it's tilting toward the sun, the temperatures get warmer, which means that we're going to have more water available. It's not going to be locked up in snow or ice. We're going to have a lot more precipitation and evaporation cycles, making water cyclically available. There's a lot of space because if we're just, let's think about plants. Plant species died back. Their roots, remember those dicot roots? They're waiting for all these great factors that I just mentioned, but the ground is pretty empty. There's not a lot of competition for space right now. So we've got a lot of favorable conditions right now in the spring, which leads us to a J-shaped curve. See that J? Through the middle of the summer. By the middle to late summer, space has been taken over. We think about our prairie, it's kind of gray, beige right now. By summer, it's going to be green and it's going to be crowded. There's going to be lots of flowers and plants. So crowding is going to happen. Crowding, competition for nutrients, space. There's going to be more predators out there. Once these plants start growing, the animals will come out of their hibernation spots. They're going to start eating plants. They're going to start to get predators. So we have this really great biotic potential, and then environmental resistance hits. And when it really hits hard, you have what's called a bust. So boom goes with growth, growth, boom, crash, bust. And then through the fall, things start to die back. All the animals go into their little hibernation spots. It gets cold, water availability, tilting away from the sun. Temperatures get colder. Everything tries to maintain a low level throughout the winter, and then again, happens again. So we have this yearly cycle that happens. Very unique to places that have seasons, that have changes in what the temperature, the weather, has a huge impact on natural populations. We can also look at this over a great deal of time. If we're studying something like these reindeer here, over a long period of time in a specific area, that when they start to move in, and there's a few of them, probably what has happened is there was a population way over there, and it had a lot of environmental resistance, and things got not so pleasant for survival, is that a few of them, or a group of, not a few, but a group of them come into a new area. And in this new area, they find lots of space, lots of food, less competition, less predators, less disease. And so then they're like, woo, this is great. Something happens here to the population. Maybe a disease comes in. Maybe there's an earthquake, a hurricane. Numbers go down, and then they start to trickle up again. You can see kind of, if we rounded it, that J shape. And then right here, at about 1935, some kind of environmental resistance, or a lot of kinds, of environmental resistance just hammer this population, and then you start to have that bust or that decline. So depending on how hard environmental resistance is going to hit a population, a number of different scenarios can happen. So let's go with the ones we've been looking at, where we have that boom or that growth and that crash or that bust. So first, let's take a look at red. I know yours don't have the colors in them. So on my graph here in red, you can see the red, woo, it's good. Got a nice J shape. Environmental resistance is really hard, heavy, many factors, and they go, and the population dies out. It's gone. So that's the worst thing that can happen to a population. It doesn't usually get that bad. The next two scenarios are what would happen normally. And it just depends on how bad is environmental resistance, or is it like manageable? We can deal with it. So let's look at the next scenario, blue. So again, woo, we got nice biotic potential, J-shaped curve. Environmental resistance kicks in, they start to die off. They get to a pretty low number. And then, based on the environmental resistance, which it hits really hard here, it's not going to go away. But they get to a level where they dip down, they get some low numbers, and then they're like, okay, maybe there's more space now because a lot of individuals have died off. There's a lot less competition. Whatever the disease may have been, it's under control. And so they start to rebound back. Now look at what happens is they start to do this hovering at a place where after you have great biotic potential and then you have that kick-in of environmental resistance, you've got that big crash there of the two of them, we have, let's look at blue and green, that over time what they do is the population will generally start to level off. Now this leveling off, it is called the carrying capacity. What we mean by carrying capacity is the amount of individuals in a population that can be carried or supported for a long period of time. It means where can we reasonably live in a relationship with negative factors to still survive over time. So they crash down, again, low population, less competition, less space, more space because everything's died, maybe disease is cured, and then they start to rebound, and then what happens, now notice this, that it's not a straight line, but it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down. So what natural populations typically do in an area is once they've experienced this awfulness, they're like, yay, no. And then they start to go like, okay, it's okay. We can do this. We can do this for a long time. But limitations are felt in a population when you see the carrying capacity, that they start to reproduce a lot and then things start to get a little bit uncomfortable and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Things are getting too much. Competition is too much. Predators are starting to see us. Let's back off on the reproduction for a bit. So then they back off on the reproduction. They're like, oh, it's good again. And then they go up a little bit. And then they start to feel it hard again. And they're like, okay, let's go down again. And so over time, they feel that like good and bads, but they maintain kind of like a average level over time. Okay, so this, in our population, whatever happens here, the rebound is hard. It's very, very hard. But they come back and they rebound. We would call this a reduced carrying capacity. They still survive over time, but ideally, what would happen is green, is that again, they experience biotic potential, but where they start to level off is not way, way up here before things can eventually get really, really bad. When they start to feel that really harsh pressure of all the forms of environmental resistance, they slow down on the reproduction. And our J is fatter. It goes wider. So we do still call that a J-shaped curve. If we're just looking from like here down, it's still a J, It's just a fat J. So one of the things that I want you to recognize on these graphs is that each of these three have a J-shaped curve initially to show biotic potential. So we're seeing for the red and blue, our J like that. But when we take a look at green, our J is a little bit wider. Remember that biotic potential will illustrate or exhibit a J-shaped curve. So even when you've got both parts of this, you do see that initial J-shaped curve showing biotic potential. Now, what happens next will give us a different letter. So now this, I can't draw that much, but this starts to go like that. And what you're seeing is something that looks more like that. The green definitely gives us that. And so when you have a curve that goes like this, what letter does that look like? An S. So when you have the combination of exponential growth with carrying capacity, you go from having a J-shaped curve to, over time, an S-shaped curve. S-shaped curves are more reality. Someone say something? Okay. So now, when you have that interaction between biotic potential and environmental resistance, we get a different curve. We get an S. So this is more reality. All right, so back to that term, carrying capacity. What's the capacity of the environment to carry the most individuals for the longest amount of time? That's what carrying capacity means. Carrying capacity is determined by all of the harsh environmental resistance factors that kick in. Space, nutrient, water, light, competition, predators, diseases. So this list of environmental resistant factors, this is just a few. There's many, many, many things that can start to hammer on that population. When you have little environmental resistance, your S begins to form earlier. Your S is like a big S. If you have a lot of environmental resistance, your S is a very short S. Your biotic potential can either be severely affected by environmental resistance, where you get that little tiny S, or the population starts to go, whoa, this is getting uncomfortable. Survival is getting harder. Let's slow down our births. It's interesting in studying different populations. It's like, when do they cognizantly acknowledge, hey, everybody slow down and communicate that? Or do they just, it's like a free-for-all? Who knows? I mean, because we have cognition, we can be communicate that. But then there's other factors and rules and leaders and things like that. So in natural populations, it would be really interesting to know when the carrying capacity is determined and why. It'd be an interesting study. All right, so things that are short-lived. Bacteria, protists, fungi. A lot of the smaller species, seasonal species, are going to show this cycle. We talked about that. Okay, so again, just remember this graph from before. When we saw these seasonal graphs, I just want to point out, I didn't put it on here, but remember this is biotic potential here. Environmental resistance kicks in. Biotic potential here, where the biotic potential starts to go down, that's where your environmental resistance kicks in. We might see it not just seasonally, but every 5 years. So if we're taking a look at this lemming, this little creature, they go through series. It looks like about 5 years where they're boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust. So it's interesting that this particular species, you never really see a carrying capacity. They just go up and down, up and down, up and down. I think the hope is like this one got really close, this cycle, to going extinct. Now, again, it would be interesting to study that and try and figure out, like, what are they thinking? Are they thinking? Maybe not. What's going on? That they'll just like endure this over time. Okay, so now we're going to talk about environmental resistance. Well, I mean, we have been, but a lot more. Environmental resistance, it's going to fight, counteract, kick in, limit biotic potential. In your life, you might think about that as adulting, right? Got this great kid life, and now that you're an adult, this adulting stuff is starting to creep in. It's not making life so much fun anymore. Eventually, you'd like it to stabilize. You'd like to be like, okay, I can handle this amount of stuff. I'm going to take on this amount of stuff. Just like a natural population, they're like, ooh, things are getting really complicated. Let's like slow down a little bit. But always, I mean, when you're having fun, things are good, you're not thinking about the bad stuff. So most populations, when they're just like living large, they're surviving easily, they're not thinking, well, maybe we should just like calm down and not have so much fun or not have so much growth because other things will come in the future. So always in a population, you're going to see that J. Even if a population, even if they come in and do this, there still was a little J. It just depends on when that J hits this point of when you're going to start to deal with or assume a carrying capacity. All right, so some of the things I've been mentioning: crowding, competition, diseases, predators. So many different kinds of environmental resistance. A bad weather event, a geological event, could be a lot of different things. When things start to get crowded, you might have a group that emigrates somewhere else. If you remember back to evolution, we called that the founder effect. A group left the population, and probably because of environmental resistance. Could be that individuals just start to die at a younger age because of all these bad environmental resistance factors, or individuals say, I'm not going to reproduce. And humans, we're definitely seeing that a lot more. That we see still some individuals are like, no, I wanted to have a big family, I'm having a big family. And we see a lot of people who say, no, the world's kind of a screwy place right now, I'm not going to reproduce. So we, with cognition or maybe not, some of these things can still kick in. All right, so again, stabilization is where you hit the carrying capacity. Environmental resistance factors become significant and you're like, let's slow down. So this here, the carrying capacity shows us that there can be stabilization. It is not perfect. It will kind of bounce up and down. Over time, what we often see, if we studied a population for a long period of time and we saw their biotic potential, the J-shaped curve, and then the leveling off of the carrying capacity, if we took that area of leveling off of the carrying capacity and we calculated every year what is our R, our growth rate, you would see that it would be about 0. But for a long period of time, because it does go up and down a little bit. Remember that it goes up and down because when you start to hit that hard environmental resistance and begin to level off, the population will go down a bit and then they'll be like, oh, it's starting to get very comfortable. And when it becomes very comfortable, individuals will go, hey, things are good. Let's start to add more individuals to the population. And then they hit this like, oh, maybe that's enough, that's enough, that's enough. And then they like go down a little bit. And then they're like, this is good again. And so it goes kind of up and down at a more micro scale of the biotic potential and the crash. Typically what we're looking at are what are called type 1 survivorship species. Usually organisms like us who have really, really long lifespans. We're going to take a look at different characteristics of survivorship in a minute, or maybe now. Again, S-shaped curve. All right, so this is an ideal graph of what's happening with that S-shaped curve. You have that biotic potential. Environmental resistance kicks in. It's always around. Things go down. They're like at their low that they're willing or able to go with for a long period of time. Then they feel like, oh, it's pretty good. Population's low. They go up a bit, and then they're like, well, it's starting to feel bad up here again. Then they go down a little bit, up a little bit, and over time, it's about 0 population growth at the carrying capacity. And again, like this shows really, really perfect situation, but we're like you saw with the reindeer, how it went up and then it had a little spike down and then it went back up again. You're not going to always see this perfectly fluid J-shaped curve. What you might see over time to get here this is what we call a textbook curve, is that we actually might see it go like something more like that would be the reality of what your data would probably show you. All right, carrying capacity, the maximum amount of individuals that can be supported for an indefinite or really long period of time is determined by renewable resources, what can be regrown. So we're looking at a lot of our photosynthesizers, our autotrophs. We know that water goes up and down. You've got evaporation, precipitation cycles. Sunlight, the earth spins, sun goes up, sun goes down. Inorganic nutrients, air, water, all of those non-living factors come in and out. But also a big one is space. And space is not renewable for most natural populations. Now, humans, we can't take every area of the whole Earth, so it is non-renewable for us, but we can defy this in ways that other natural populations can't. All right, so environmental resistance falls into two categories. One is density independent. Density means number. Independent means not related. So again, look at what the terms mean. If you're on the exam and gives a scenario and your choices, you get it down to density dependent and density independent. Remember what the words mean. That should help you. All right, density independent means that this type of environmental resistance is going to hurt that population. Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. If something happens in that particular area, it's going to wipe you out, or it's going to make your numbers bust down. So think about a hurricane. If you have in an area the severe effects of a hurricane or an earthquake or drought, it is going to affect big populations as much as small populations. Density dependent, there we go. This depends on the size of the population, how hard it's going to hurt. If you have more individuals, it's going to hurt more. Smaller populations won't deal with this as harshly, or vice versa. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So density independent, typically weather events, drought, hurricane, earthquake, flood, climate change. Humans. If our administration says, let's go and let's get rid of our prairie to put in another parking lot, doesn't matter if you have a small population, maybe we just planted some new plants and there's like 5 of them out there, so a small population. Maybe there's an established population of cattails out there, there's tens of thousands of them. If we're going to come and mow that down, small populations, big populations, gone. Density is not dependent on the factor. It's independent. All right, density dependent. This is a really good one. Predation. If you're a group of 3 and this, let's say 30 predators come by, would it be easy for 3 individuals to hide and be quiet? Probably. If you're 100 and 30 predators come along, is it a lot harder for 100 to hide and be quiet? Yeah, probably. So here's where your density or amount will have an effect. In the case of predation, a larger population is way more in danger of predators than a small population. Predation means to kill and eat another organism. We'll talk a lot more about this next lecture. Okay, so here again, I've referred to this before. If we're looking at predator-prey relationships and cycles in terms of our growth over time, they will mirror each other, but one will stagger. So let's start with the hares. What we mean by hares is like bunny rabbits. So you got a population of rabbits, and then you've got lynx, which are a pretty fierce cat. So the lynx like to eat the hares. Lynx are the predators, hares are the prey. If we take a look at the blue line, and we start here in 1848, we see that the bunnies are thriving because their predator population is low. So right here, when the predator population starts to crash, there aren't as many predators to eat the prey, so the prey numbers start to go up. But as more prey are around, these predators who began to starve are like, wait, what? Oh, there's more food. So as they're increasing shortly thereafter, the predators start to increase. When the predators start to get high again, they start to eat the bunnies. And something happens in here that's interesting. But once they get high, the bunnies, the prey, start to go down. With less food, the predators start to go down. Predators are low, whoop, bunny population goes up. And you see that they mimic each other. They're kind of mirror images of each other, but one is staggered. The predators are just behind what the prey do. Pretty interesting, I think. All right, and again, there's another population that we can see that over time. That predator population is down, prey population goes up. And then you see them, if we moved this, if you moved the blue line just over a little bit, it would look very, very similar to the red line. Parasites. When you have a large population, there's more crowding. Individuals are closer to each other. So parasites can spread more quickly. It's just like in the fall, when the air gets drier, viruses, bacteria can float in the air for longer amounts of time because the humidity goes down. They can float longer. When people are inside because it's colder outside, you've got ideal conditions for a parasite to come in and have an effect on populations. Parasitism means that one organism lives in or on a host, another organism, for a long period of time. They want to keep that host alive. So you might think of something like a tapeworm, but virus, bacteria, some fungus, lots of different kinds of parasites. And then there's competition. Things get crowded. Everybody's fighting for the same resources. So we call that limited resources. Will everybody survive all of these fights, all of these forms of competition? So when we look over long periods of time, and depending on different situations, sorry if you got it, we're going to categorize different populations into different, what we call survivorship. And what we mean by survivorship is we mean over long periods of time, how does our population survive and why? So typically we're going to look at like time periods. We might say the age of an organism in a typical lifespan of that species. What do we see in terms of survival percentage at different stages of that species' life? So depending on if you're a glass half full or empty, you might say it's a pattern of deaths, boo, or it's a pattern of life, yay. I don't know, however you want to look at your pattern. And different populations have different characteristics, different environmental resistance, different ways that benefit them in terms of biotic potential. Remember all of those? We said fecundity, first stage of reproduction, how many times can you reproduce in your lifetime, how long is your reproductive life, and do your offspring survive? All of those are factors in survivorship in addition to environmental resistance. All right, so first kind is called late loss. Late loss implies that you will be lost or die later in life. So late losses die later because in the juveniles usually survive. That period of being young is a good, safe time. And there are reasons for that. What we will see is a convex survivorship curve. All right, so just based on this, low juvenile death rate, most individuals survive to old age. Which of these would you choose? So what I would do is I would say, who lives a long life? Not bacteria, not flies. Birds are probably in the middle. All right, we've got two species that live a long life. Which one of these two species has a low juvenile death rate? Let me tell you, sea turtles usually lay about 200 eggs per clutch. And those that make it out of the shells onto the beach, there's a lot of things that are like yum, 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 yum. So out of 200, maybe only like 6 make it to the ocean. That's a really high juvenile death rate. Humans, do we usually like take care of our young and protect them? We usually have 1, 2 at a time, maybe a few more sometimes. But we have a low juvenile death rate and a long-lived life. Okay, so humans, many other long-lived species. Okay, why? We have 2 choices. Why do type 1 survivorship species survive to old age? Is it because each individual has many offspring which are not protected by their parents during early life? That doesn't make any sense. Each individual has few offspring which are protected by their parents during early life. Okay, that hopefully, if you just think about it, will be obvious. All right, so few offspring, but you're going to really put a lot of your energy into your offspring's survival. You have the time to nurture them, to ensure that they have the best chance of living a long life. Because you're only looking after like 1 to a few. Constant loss. This is type 2 survivorship curve. Oh, this one is a constant death rate. So what that means in terms of each individual's lifespan, every day you wake up, you're like, this could be the day I die. That is a reality for you. Whoa, that's a lot. It's a straight line survivorship curve. As you get older, so time increases, every day that you survive, there's a bigger chance that next day. So that's tough. Sorry, I need that. I would not want to be this. Talk about anxiety. All right, birds. Bacteria. A lot of smaller organisms. Any species that migrates. Because imagine that, like you're a bird, right? And birds typically, let's say ones that live in Canada and Mexico, they hit those points throughout 1 year, is that they're flying all the way from Canada down to Mexico, or like monarch butterflies do that. They're flying, flying, flying. Every day, you don't exactly know what you're flying into. Every day, there's new dangers to face. So every day could be it. And then the last one is early loss. That you're an organism who has a lot of siblings and only 1, maybe 2 parents looking after you. If there are 100, 1,000 siblings with you, one or two parents, do you have a good chance of surviving early life? No, you're on your own. You're on your own, kid. So we have a concave survivorship curve. If you are the one with the best genes, the best situation, in that 1,000, you might have a chance of making it to old age. So here's your see-through. So usually, a lot of offspring, parents do not have the ability to protect all of them, so they usually don't protect any of them. They're just like, good luck, kids, have a good life, and they move on. This is interesting. Deer are one that do this. They try and pump out as many as they can. Oftentimes deer, because they live so closely with humans, they have a lot of environmental resistance like that, so they're unique in that. And they're bigger, so they can be seen easier. We hunt them. A few other mammal populations that get hunted, but mostly like things that live in the ocean, things that live in water, is that because the environment is so static, changing, even in a localized area, they're like, just put out as many offspring as possible. So here you can see what the curves look like. We will be looking at these in lab today. We will do an experiment to see which one is it. Again, these are not going to be perfect. It's not going to be like that or straight across. So you might see like that instead of this perfect type 1 line. If we're looking at type 2, it might be like that. And if you're looking at type 3, it might be well, I guess it can't go up again, but like that. What I want you to do today or tomorrow when you're analyzing, after you collect your data, you probably collect data today and analyze your data on Tuesday, is that when you get something like this and this, and you're like, this kind of looks like it could be type 2, but then it really does level out really low, I would say that this is more of a type 3 survivorship curve because of the really low level here. If your graph is kind of like, it does dip, but then it kind of like stays in the middle of the graph area totally, I would say this would be, again, like a type 2. If you have like a lot of this up and down, but you have this like arching thing at the end. So make sure when you're analyzing your data that you're looking for major trends. Is it mostly in the middle? It's type 2. Is it kind of like this weird thing, but there's a low bottom to it? Then you're looking at your type 3, and does it go kind of weirdly, whatever it does here, but then it's like dips way late? That's type 1. So remember that, because graphs are not going to be, you are not going to get these curves. So talk about that a lot. Let's see if I have. All right, let's just cram it in, because I wouldn't be me if I didn't just go as long as I can. All right, so a little bit about the human population. Oh boy, we are definitely still, we're going up, up, up. Technology makes a huge difference. We talked about this with evolution. As soon as we learned to use tools, the human population started to go up. All right, agriculture tools, industry, building, using plastic, all of these different ways that we buy things, medicine, vaccines, antibiotics, hospitals. A lot of your whole life is going to be medicine. All of these things, as we learn to use tools, they went up. All right, human population. I looked this up the other day. We're at 8.1 billion. The US population went down a little bit during COVID, but we are on an upswing again. by, 9 billion by 2037, 10 billion by 2057. More developed countries are getting bigger. Less developed countries are getting bigger. Why can we do this? As I've been mentioning, we can defy, evade, get around, manipulate environmental resistance, right? Just by taking an antibiotic or getting a vaccine saves so many people from dying. If we didn't just have medicine, think about like people who have heart attacks. If we didn't have a surgery to fix that, everybody who has heart disease would just die and not have an elongated life. So we have, and then that's just medicine. So we have a lot of factors. So even this was technology. This was huge, important technology right here. So was this, so is this. All of those things, just figuring out, I can use a rock and I can sharpen it and I can stab things and I can get more calories by eating animals than plants. Making fire, I can get different nutrients out of my food than if I eat it raw. I can cook food in cold climates. I can write messages. I can keep data by writing. Fire, clothing, our food systems, technology began here. Now we have this. Good and bad, right? Good and bad. So we'll talk more about that. All right, so there's like a lot of ideas here of what that last picture summarized. We will talk a lot more about that when we get into sustainability, but I just want this in your notes for context. A lot of this I've talked about. Our food systems, I mean, we eat foods here in the United States that we should not be eating. Like bananas, they don't grow here. But we have such a variety of what we can eat that makes us healthier, have different nutrients, live longer. There's so many, just in terms of agriculture, industry, and medicine technologies that make us like so much better. Right, right. When I was a kid, a million years ago, like when I was a kid, we didn't eat strawberries in the winter because systems were like, that's too expensive to fly. I mean, who would fly strawberries across the world? Right? But now we do it. So it definitely, things change or not, right? We have what's called total fertility rate, TFR, or sometimes you see it as RLF. What that means is that as humans and a mating pair, you should only replace yourself. So as a human, 2 people should have 2 kids. That would give us a stable population growth. Our current TFR is 2.47. So we are ticking up, right? The baby, you know why they call them boomers? The baby boomers, that generation, they were on average, a pair was having 5. So that's the baby boom, why they call them boomers, because the population went boom. So it's gone way, way down. It's like half of what it used to be, but still more than 2, right? And when you have over 1 billion people and it's more than 2, that's a lot. Those percentages are a lot. So here it's gone down, but still we should be here. And we're not at this line for stabilization. All right, so just give you an idea of the world regional population growth. Again, we're at about 2.5, 1.2%. 1.2% of 8.1 billion is a significant number. And then you can just see like different countries. You have that in your notes to take a look at. Different countries or areas of the world do different things. We call this age structure graph. So in the United States, we're more like this. We're kind of like we're like just a tiny bit, but we're not quite this. And some are shrinking. All right, let's see. Do we have any more? Okay, okay. So we're going up a little bit. We're just a little bit over 2.